What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing well. I am so excited about today's show. First of all, because today's show marks the end of the Overcoming Obesity series. If you missed that one, you can check it out. Overcoming Obesity Part 1, The Scope of the Problem. You can find that at www.definingdadbod.com/Overcoming Obesity 1. It was a very powerful series, and in the wake of the new article that came out by Huffington Post titled Everything You Know About Obesity is Wrong, I find that it's very relevant given the idea that it's important that we as a society address obesity at a grassroots level. And here at Defining Dad Bod, I don't believe that the answer to that is some newfangled, spangled diet, but that the answer that's going to help us overcome obesity, not just as parents, but also in our community and with the next generation of children, is rooted in the ability to optimize our hormones. And so if you missed that series, go check it out. I'm very excited that it's out in the world, and we'll be doing a compilation episode soon so that it's all in one place, easy for you to find. But the other more important reason why I'm so excited today for this show is today marks the beginning of a new series. And you can call this series Exercise in the Brain. Put simply, I've spent a good deal of time on this show talking about cardiorespiratory fitness, talking about weight training, talking about mastering our metabolism in terms of regulating our hormones with nutrition. But I've also just brushed the surface of one of the most important aspects of our personal health and fitness. And that is the profound effect of our ability to change the structure of our brains through exercise. And in today's show, part 1 of Exercise in the Brain, we're going to talk about why the brain matters. We're also going to talk about what exercise can do for the brain, especially with regard to anxiety, depression, ADHD, and even stress. Then we're going to dive into some of the science about the impact of exercise on different brain systems. And then we're going to finish off on a note of cardiorespiratory fitness versus weight training. Which one is better? Which one should you do more of? And what part do they play in affecting the brain? Now, a brief note before we get started here. First, though my formal education is a psychology degree from Vanderbilt University, I am by no means a psychiatrist or a neuroscientist. And I'll be drawing from a lot of help from many different resources in order to bring this information to you. If you're interested in a resource to follow along with me, I will base a lot of our conversations here on a book called Spark by Dr. John Ratey, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain, as he does a fantastic job at compiling the last 30 years of neuroscientific research and history in relating it to his own personal experience as a psychiatrist in treating his patients for things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, and even working to stave off Alzheimer's. The second thing I should note is that there are many medical problems that can happen in the brain. I've listed several, and that list is not exhaustive. Everything that we're about to talk about here is not intended as medical advice in order to treat any kind of illness. At Defining Dad Bod, I'm interested in equipping you with the information that you need to be motivated and inspired to take positive steps in your own personal health and fitness in order to become the best version of yourself. And to that end, I think it's important that you understand how your exercise habits can and will affect the structure and function of arguably the most important organ in the body, your brain. If you're currently being treated for anxiety, depression, ADHD, or other psychological issues, Alex at Defining Dad Bod did not tell you to put down your medication and exercise instead, because that could be just as powerful. What I did tell you is that you should start a discussion with your doctor about how exercise might help you in your treatment plan in order to support and benefit you in your wrestling with those disorders for a better outcome. Let's get started. First, let's talk about why the brain matters. Yeah, this is Defining Dad Bod. And up until this point, we have talked about exercise, we've talked about nutrition, and we've talked about lifestyle change. I've walked you through how sets, reps, and time under tension might affect how you actually adapt in your musculoskeletal system to the workouts that you're doing. I've talked about how sugar affects your insulin. I've talked about how sleep affects your cortisol. I've even talked about how base training, moderate intensity training, and high intensity training can affect your cardiorespiratory system and make you a better fat burner. So why are we about to talk about the brain? When we think exercise, We think muscles. We think skeletal system. We think tendons and ligaments. We think heart and lungs and bloodstream. We think burning fat, but we don't think much about the space between our ears. I mean, when was the last time you talked to somebody in the gym doing curls in the squat rack and they tell you, oh yeah, this is a great arm workout, but I'm really exercising my brain. That's the thing you don't see. And while a vehement argument might be made that if exercise helps to enhance the brain, then the guy doing curls in the squat rack needs more of it, there's a lot of truth to the statement that regular exercise affects the brain powerfully, positively, and in ways we don't quite understand yet. But let's talk about some of the practical wisdom about why our brains matter with regard to our health and fitness. First, the perfect exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle program does not matter if you can't follow it. What does the brain have to do with that? Well, first, your brain is your source of willpower. If your brain's in great health and everything's working like it's supposed to, you can choose to eat what you know you should be eating, rather than eating the stuff you know you shouldn't be eating, but you just can't help it. Similarly, how much cardio do you feel like you're going to be doing if you feel depressed? What about that feeling of overwhelming energy and creativity and excitement that we can see so fresh in our children? But when we look in the mirror, it's kind of like the world's a little bit gray, and we wonder where all that enthusiasm went. Do you think you might be more excited about your health and fitness program if your brain was in a great place to bring you some of that enthusiasm and energy? What about some ADHD? Your program says you should do these 10 exercises for 3 sets of 10 repetitions. But you lack the attention and get pretty bored after about 3 exercises, and so you don't even see it through. Or what about the stress that you feel in your giant to-do list that you have to get done today? How is that keeping you from doing the workouts that you know you need to be doing and eating the food that you know you should be spending time preparing, when instead you skip the gym and grab a protein bar with a bunch of garbage in it to get to your giant to-do list that's been stressing you out? One of the reasons your brain matters is that the health of the structure of your brain allows you to follow a perfect program. It allows you to create the applied behaviors that you're going to need in order to stick to a program for a long period of time. One of the things that I ask all of my brand new clients to do in the very beginning of their program is to start counting their sugars. Every single thing that goes into your face, you need to tally the grams of sugar that just went into your face. For this reason, some of my clients call me the sugar Nazi. But is it your biceps or your heart health that allow you to think, how many grams of sugar is in this? Let me look at the ingredients label real quick. Is it bulging 6-pack abs or better cardiorespiratory fitness that begins to build in you an intuitive understanding of the things in your life that have way more sugar than you should be eating? Is it your physical ability to squat without pain that makes you diligently create a grocery list and spend some time cooking your own food at home so that you don't have to eat the sugar that's out there? No, 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 and no. A healthy brain allows you the ability to learn and the ability to turn behaviors into habits so that you can act out your perfect program every single day. And in the fitness industry, that's what we call a magic bullet. If there was a way to create the perfect program for clients and to help them to perfectly implement that in their life so that they got amazing results that they sustain for the long term, then whoever invented that silver bullet would be a billionaire. And what I'm telling you about your brain and your ability to create new neurons and to learn new behaviors and to have the willpower required to create new habits, that is a magic bullet. And so your brain matters because the perfect program does not matter if you can't follow it. The next reason the brain matters is life independence. Now I'm going to ask you to take a really long-term view for me. And bear with me because this is not something many people will ask you to do. But in my career as a personal trainer in the last 13 years, I spent the first 8 years of it working almost exclusively with women over age 50. And something that I learned from women over age 50 is that many times they are in the process of taking care of their aging parents. Now, there are a lot of conversations that we could have about taking care of your aging parents. However, the one thing that stood out very starkly to me while working with those women as they spoke about taking care of their aging parents is that the health of the brain of their parents significantly impacted the amount of stress that they were under. There were some ladies who would describe their mom as being all there, a pleasant person to talk to, somebody that you're happy to do things for, and excited when she comes to visit for Christmas. Sure, she's getting older, but she's an inspiration. And then there were other ladies who would describe their moms by saying, there's nothing more stressful than getting a call at 11 p.m. because your mom doesn't know where she's at and is mad at you for not coming to visit, even though you didn't have a visit planned. The big difference between these two types of conversations that I would have in my sessions with these ladies is that one group's parents had brains that were in great health. Sure, they weren't 20 anymore, but they weren't confused when they walked outside, or regularly forgetting best friends that they've had for all of their life. Whereas the stress and the anguish in the other group came from parents whose brains were on decline in their health, and they seemed to be losing their independence more and more every week. And that loss of independence increased their dependence on their children. It was a brutal thing to watch from afar, and my heart really went out to my clients. But it really got me thinking about health and fitness. What does the body matter if the mind can't hang? What do washboard abs and increased cardiorespiratory fitness and great metabolisms do for you if every day you're having trouble remembering, you're having trouble orienting, you're unable to learn, and you're generally just a burden on all of the people around you? And that experience convinced me that yes, weight training was important for musculoskeletal health, and yes, cardiorespiratory exercise is very important to ensure a healthy fat-burning metabolism and to stave off ischemic heart disease. But none of that matters if the brain isn't in good health and you lose your independence later on in life. Your brain matters in your health and fitness because it is the foundation of your personal independence. There will likely be a time in every single one of our lives where we have to lean on our family members a little more than we would like to. But if exercise can help our brains and therefore help us to maintain our independence as long as possible, then perhaps there are things we can be doing right now to decrease the burden we have on our children and grandchildren in the future. The third reason why the brain matters is it is the great equalizer. In order to understand what that means, it'll help us to go to the other side of the timeline of life and talk about childhood development. There was a fascinating meta-analysis done by the California Department of Education recently, and they looked at grade outcomes at the elementary level, compared to things like socioeconomic status of the parents, BMI of the child, aerobic fitness of the child, number of gym classes taught in school, incidence of malnutrition, attendance to Head Start, gender differences, and so on and so forth. In this meta-analysis, they looked at thousands of research studies done at the elementary level for children, and once they sifted through all the data, there were two metrics that were very highly correlated with whether or not elementary children were able to learn how to read well, were able to perform arithmetic well, were able to perform well on science tests, and able to perform on cognitive function or problem-solving tasks. And the two factors that they found were correlated most highly with outcomes in elementary children was not socioeconomic status, was not gender, and was not even dependent on if one or two parents were in the household. BMI, body mass index, and aerobic fitness were the two most highly correlated factors with grade outcomes in elementary children. What does that mean? It means that the health and fitness of the body, even in childhood, affects the health and fitness of the brain. And this is especially powerful to me in my story, growing up in a single-parent household below the poverty line. I got picked on for wearing wrinkled hand-me-down clothes. I missed out on field trips that my family couldn't pay for. And I often looked around at the world around me and wondered why everybody else had a dad and I didn't. But I played every sport I could get my hands on, and I was heavily into kickboxing. And it's so powerful for me as an adult to read about a study that suggests, in the words of the researchers, that the effects of health and fitness on the brain are the great equalizer. It seems to transcend the socioeconomic status. In fact, the effect is so monumental that in the research it transcends whether or not you're poor, whether or not both parents are in the house, or whether or not you have the, quote, opportunities that other people might have that might give them the leg up in the grades world. And that could very well hold true for things like promotions at work, or the ability to manage your money well, and your social interactions with your community, your spouse, and your kids. If exercise can affect the function of the brain, and the brain helps you excel in many other avenues in life, even more so than opportunities created by things like socioeconomic status, then the ability to affect the brain through exercise really is the great equalizer of our time. So here in part 1, in talking about why the brain matters in your own personal health and fitness journey, we're going to take a 10,000-foot view approach to understanding some of the very basic changes that happen in the brain both during and after exercise and accumulate over time so that we can know how anxiety, depression, ADHD, Alzheimer's, stress, confidence, and even grades can be deeply affected by the exercise that we perform because of the changes that it creates in our brain. And in future episodes of Exercise in the Brain, we're going to tackle very specific subjects to understand how exercise changes and morphs the brain to help us with regard to things like depression, ADHD, anxiety, and more. So I've been talking about why the brain matters. Let's take a bit to talk about how exercise actually affects the brain. We're going to focus on 3 very specific areas where exercise influences the brain deeply. And as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot more to it than this, but these are the starting points. First, exercise balances the neurotransmitters that make up our brain signals. There are 4 major neurotransmitters that we're going to talk about here. That's GABA, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce for you what that stands for, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Now, these neurotransmitters are largely a mystery to us with regard to the science of the brain. However, in the research, they've taken on certain characteristics to really help us understand how they might function with regard to each other. For instance, serotonin has been called the policeman of the brain. As the policeman of the brain, its job is to keep other neurotransmitters in check and to keep things running smoothly. If the brain has a lack of serotonin, then things like irritability, aggressiveness, depression, anxiety, and even general malaise might manifest themselves, since the policeman of the brain can't keep everything in check. Or another example is dopamine, and dopamine's been called the motivating neurotransmitter. If you were hungry and you looked up and you saw an apple tree 200 yards away, then you get a small hit of dopamine, which is your brain signaling that, hey, that would be an important thing to pursue when you're hungry. You'd trudge along for a little bit looking at the ground and then look up again and see that the apple tree has gotten closer. And boom, another hit of dopamine tells you that you should keep moving toward that apple tree. There's a reward there for you. And so you finally make it to the apple tree, you pick up an apple, you're so hungry, and you get a huge shot of dopamine that says, great job, that's exactly what you came here for. But the health and fitness of the brain is not exactly keeping serotonin high or keeping dopamine high in order that you function well, are nice and motivated, and your neurotransmitters are policed. Instead, what's important about neurotransmitters with regard to you and your personal health and fitness for your brain is that your neurotransmitters exist in balance. You have certain levels of GABA, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine that make you feel like the best version of yourself. And mine might look a little bit different from that. And so the answer for powerful health in the brain is not exactly just to raise or lower one specific neurotransmitter. Like in the case of depression, an SSRI might be prescribed in order to elevate the amount of serotonin in the brain. And for a period of time, that can be really helpful to get over a particularly depressing time in life. But exercise doesn't work like an SSRI in the sense that it's going to elevate serotonin and make you feel less depressed. Instead, exercise seems to rebalance neurotransmitters so that you can come back to your normal baseline of your best self. Your GABA, your serotonin, your norepinephrine, and dopamine after exercise all seem to exist in a nice homeostatic balance. And every time you exercise, particularly in the vein of cardiorespiratory exercise, you get a nice rebalancing effect on your neurotransmitters. And in that way, from day to day and week to week, as you exist as the best version of yourself from a neurotransmitter perspective, You can make good decisions and feel energetic and be inspired and motivated and excited about the things in life that are worth being inspired, motivated, and excited about. And while we'll talk about these neurotransmitters more individually in future episodes of Exercise in the Brain, it's just important right now that you understand that with regard to the brain, exercise balances neurotransmitters, and in that way helps you experience the best version of you. The next thing that exercise does for the brain is it increases something called BDNF. That's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, BDNF is not necessarily classified as a neurotransmitter. It's more like a bundle of proteins that allow cells to do things they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. BDNF is exceptionally important because it allows brain cells to sprout new connections with other brain cells. And that process is an extremely important part of memory and learning. Dr. Rady calls it in his book, the miracle grow of the brain. And exercise increases the amount of that miracle grow. After a bout of 20 to 30 minutes of cardiorespiratory exercise, that is running around the block, hiking up a mountain, going for a bike ride, dragging your toddler, you get a nice uptick of BDNF in the brain, which actually increases your nerves' ability to connect with each other. And that translates to you learning your job in a way that accelerates you toward a promotion, or getting better at counting the amount of sugar that you eat in order to regulate your insulin and drop the body fat you'd like to drop. It also allows the areas of the brain that should be connected in order to reduce anxiety to work more efficiently. For instance, there's a portion of your brain called your hippocampus, which has many jobs, but one of the jobs is to regulate the function of the amygdala. If your amygdala is allowed to do whatever it wants, then you're going to be a stressed out, anxious mess all of the time. And so, if your hippocampus has the ability to make new connections with BDNF, then your hippocampus is going to do a much better job of regulating your amygdala, and therefore reducing the amount of anxiety you feel with regard to the stress in your life. I often joke with my clients, I know your kids can be big stressors to you sometimes, and I can't get rid of them. However, what we can do is teach your brain to be much better at regulating the stress that they put you under. And in that way, you'll be a much better mom. So exercise increases BDNF, the miracle grow of the brain. And that's a very good thing, no matter what kind of mental issues you might be dealing with. The last thing that we'll talk about today with regard to exercise in the brain is that exercise increases the neurogenesis that happens in the brain. Neuro being new nerve cells, genesis being the creation of. So neurogenesis is the creation of new cells in the brain. Now, if you're like me, then 20 years ago, certain people in your life told you that watching TV was going to kill your brain cells, and you don't get any more of those, so you should probably limit the amount of TV you watch. Now, I don't know whether or not watching TV kills brain cells, and there are arguments to be made about how screen time might be affecting the linguistic development centers of our children's brains and the ability to do creative things. But that's not the conversation we're having today. 10 years ago, studies were done on cancer patients where they injected radioactive dye into the body in order to detect tumors. The increased metabolic activity of the tumors made the radioactive dye congregate there, and so researchers were able to find the tumors themselves through this kind of imaging. The other thing that researchers found on these cancer patients is that a lot of the radioactive dye congregated in the hippocampus. And what that meant was that new nerve cells were being generated at that level of the brain, and it blew the lid off of one of the biggest myths, and that is that you only start out with a certain number of brain cells, and then you spend the rest of your life trying not to kill them off. Further research has been done since then to suggest that we're creating new brain cells every single day. And exercise might actually significantly increase the amount of new brain cells that we create every day. Now, it might not be true of everything, but in the case of the brain, more cells is always better. More brain cells lets you learn new things. More brain cells increases the density of different brain structures that allow you to perform complex tasks. More nerve cells gives your brain the opportunity to adapt to your life as it's happening right now. The nerve cells that already exist and are already part of a network of learned material can't really move anywhere. And so, if you're going to get any better at your squat, or if you're going to get any better at learning a new language, Or if you're going to learn how to better relate to your teenage daughter, you're going to need some new nerve cells. And despite the claims of some supplement companies, there hasn't been a limitless pill created thus far. And so your best bet to create the best brain that you can possibly have is to become a brain cell producing machine. And the only way we know how to boost that is through exercise. So the brain matters. And exercise affects the brain very deeply at the level of balancing neurotransmitters, increasing BDNF, and increasing neurogenesis. There are many more effects that we're going to talk about over the course of this series. However, I want to end part one with a conversation about where cardiorespiratory fitness and weight training fit into these effects on the brain. It turns out that the vast majority of the positive benefits on the brain with regard to exercise come from cardiorespiratory fitness. In other words, cardio exercise, like going for a run, riding a bike, going swimming, hiking a mountain, doing the row machine, doing lots of burpees, these seem to have a disproportionately powerful effect on things like balancing neurotransmitters, increasing BDNF, and increasing neurogenesis. That is, pound for pound, if you do 30 minutes of cardio training versus 30 minutes of weight training, there seems to be a more profound positive benefit for your brain from the cardio training rather than the weight training. And while reading through the research, you might be tempted to think that cardiovascular physical fitness is the most important and most powerful part of any health and fitness regimen. I mean, if the brain is a significantly important part of your health and fitness, and your heart is, then it's very clear that cardiorespiratory fitness is superior to strength training, or some might say that cardio is more important than weight training. And many experts in exercise physiology, psychology, neuroscience, and beyond have argued that point pretty exhaustively. While being a strong advocate for weight training, both for my personal proclivity and my experience with clients themselves, I was challenged to think about this pretty deeply. And I was struck with two very real obstacles with regard to cardiorespiratory fitness. The first is that cardiorespiratory fitness is, in its essence, a repetitious movement. Running, cycling, rowing, swimming, they require the same muscles and the same joints to do the same movement over and over and over and over again. These repetitious movements ad nauseum create the opportunity for many injuries to occur in cardiorespiratory fitness. I don't know how many runners have told me, oh yeah, I get plantar fasciitis, or I have to roll my AT bands, or my hips and my back start to hurt. Or how many cyclists have told me, yeah, my hip flexors are really tight and my pelvis rolls forward. Or how many avid tennis players have told me that their shoulders are in really rough spots and they're going to have rotator cuff surgery. The second limitation of cardiorespiratory physical fitness is that those repetitious movements not only create injuries pretty often, but they also create imbalances. For instance, a cyclist will often be hip flexor dominant, where their hip flexors are shortened because of the nature of the movement of a bike. The hip flexors being shortened often also increases the length of the abdominal muscles while shortening the length of the low back muscles and rendering the hamstrings much tighter than usual. All that to say, somebody who spends hours and hours cycling might get increased BDNF, better balanced neurotransmitters, and increased neurogenesis, but then suffer from back pain, tight hamstrings, and have to stop cycling eventually, and all of those benefits go by the wayside. And so with those two truths in mind, if the brain is extremely important because the perfect program doesn't matter if you can't follow it, it helps with your life independence, and it's the great equalizer, and if cardiorespiratory physical fitness is the most prominent and powerful effect on the brain, then strength training forms the foundation that allows people to continue pursuing cardiorespiratory physical fitness and therefore a healthier brain. What I'm saying is that strength training should be done in a way that allows us to do cardiorespiratory fitness without injury and while improving the postural abnormalities that we create from repetitious movement. Well, you might say, well, hey, wait a minute. There are weight training exercises like circuit style training or CrossFit style WODs that actually challenge the cardiorespiratory system. Won't those affect the brain positively and be the best thing we can be doing? Well, yes, that's a good thought. That is a possibility. And in previous shows, I've addressed why I'm particularly interested in keeping cardio and weights from a programming perspective. But this episode is not a time to have that discussion. What I hope you take away is that with regard to brain health and fitness, cardiorespiratory exercise has powerful and profound impacts on our brain structure and function. And without resistance training, then cardiorespiratory exercise will likely result in some sort of injury and developing muscular imbalances. And if we care to continue to take good care of our brain, then resistance training needs to be implemented in a way that allows us to continue to do cardiorespiratory fitness without undue pain and without undue injury. And with that being said, let me point out that I said most of the benefits for the brain come from cardiorespiratory fitness. We'll actually find in the dementia and Alzheimer's parts of this series that new skills learned in resistance training can be a powerful part of staving off dementia and Alzheimer's. But for now, I think I've given you plenty to chew on. And so in summary, in health and fitness, many people think of only the adaptations that happen in the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the body composition, or maybe even the heart and the lungs. But in this series, Exercise in the Brain, we're going to be focusing on how exercise impacts the structure and function of the brain. This matters because the brain deeply affects our life independence, our ability to transcend hierarchies, and the ability to affect change because of the perfect programs that perhaps might come about someday. In future episodes, we're going to talk about stress, anxiety, depression, ADHD, Alzheimer's, and more, and I'm excited to talk to you about what balancing neurotransmitters, increasing BDNF, and increasing neurogenesis might do to help us with those things. And lastly, when you're thinking about how this might work in real life, we're going to use resistance training to stave off injuries and create a great foundation for the cardiorespiratory physical fitness that's going to allow us to affect our brain positively. And if this was a lot for you to take, I suggest you hop on the treadmill for about 20 minutes and then listen to it again. Maybe that increased BDNF will help it all stick. I'm very excited to continue exploring this topic with you, and I can't wait for it to be practically applied in your life to become a better version of you. This movement is made possible by listeners just like you who have gone to www.patreon.com/definingdadbod and pledged their support for the show. Every dollar contributed by our patrons allows for the production and distribution of content that will motivate and inspire this generation to leave a legacy of health and fitness for our kids. I hope you'll go there and check it out, as there are many things there to reward your patronage in the form of content, inspiration, motivation, and direction, all adapted from my 13 years as a personal trainer and life transformation strategist. This has been Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. Thank you for your support of the movement. Next week, we'll dive into stress, its effect on the brain, when it's positive, when it's negative, and everything in between. Until then, guys, kick butt, take names.